1. My dad, 63, retired in 2020. Since then, he's been hanging out on Facebook a lot of the time. And like many people his age, he's very susceptible to propaganda and never once learned how to evaluate a source. Unfortunately, this isn't the usual kind of stuff that people get radicalized by. Instead of getting radicalized into a raging racist who listens to a personality whose station has arguments that no sane person would take seriously, he got radicalized by PETA, so he's become veg-angelical. Here's the sort of nonsense he's trying to convince us. Vaccines don't cause autism. Which is true, however, he thinks casein does. You have to skin the sheep to get the wool. When I showed him a video of how sheep are actually sheared, he insisted that it was the same as skinning. Sheep were also skinned alive for wool. Even when I showed him multiple sources of how sheep were, he said those were propaganda, and no different than cutting a dog's fur. I even explained that yes, it's like cutting a poodle's hair, but like poodles, it grows back. You shouldn't wear faux fur or pleather because it will make you want to wear the real thing. Humans did not evolve to eat meat, and as a result, it's empty calories. Chick-fil-A is not only bad because of their known evangelism, but because the workers constantly kill chickens themselves. PETA has never killed any animals. Lyme disease is only the result of being close enough to cows that ticks can transmit a bacteria that protects cows. If you get allergic to red meat, it's because a tick transferred the bacteria that evolved to protect cows from predators to you. Chicken wings are obtained by cutting the wings off living chickens and leaving them to their fate, similar to how sharks are mutilated or killed for their fins. I asked him what his source was, and he said, the BBC. It's obvious how much environmental damage is placed by ordering products from other countries and states. Last year, he laid out a sustainable diet for us that would have not only tripled our grocery bills, but would have required us to mail order things that aren't even available off of Amazon from very far away. We wouldn't be allowed to eat common meat substitutes because they don't actually believe in sustainability or efficiency and just want money. The fact that these companies are, in fact, charging money went over his head. The eggs bought in a supermarket were fertilized and thus could have been chickens. When I asked him to prove it by hatching one, he said it wouldn't work because they were dead due to being stored for so long. I asked how, and he didn't answer. It's impossible to overcook, burn, or undercook plant-based substitutes for meat or any other kind of protein. He said this after burning an Impossible Burger to a crisp. You shouldn't eat fake pork because it will make you want to eat the real thing. Antibiotics kill just as many people as they do bacteria. Dingoes never attack humans, period, even though statistically speaking you are very unlikely to be harmed by a dingo. As dingoes don't go near humans typically, the dingo attacks on Fraser Island in the past 3 years never happened. I've pondered giving him some kind of grandpad or installing some kind of filter to keep him from looking at these sites. Every time he brings this crap up, he tells us something like BBC, Cambridge, Harvard, Reuters, some other university. My personal favorite when he said Gonzaga had a study that supposedly counted a number of chickens harvested by their wings over Super Bowl weekend, but could not provide us with any kind of link to it. On multiple occasions, my sister and I have stalked him on Facebook to find his sources, and not only are they PETA and PETA adjacent, many of them are screenshots having made fun with Photoshop or Inspect Element. 2. I taught high school for 7 years. I only truly encountered Kevin twice, and they were a set of twins who insisted on taking every single class together. I taught foreign language to them, or rather, they sat in my class while I taught everyone else foreign language. The highlights. They would both routinely stare at the walls, not like wandering off daydreaming as we all do, but hyperfixation on the cinder block walls. The first time I asked why, their reasoning was that they didn't think we had class that day. I guess me lecturing and putting notes on the board wasn't a clue. They were both convinced that they were extremely smart but just didn't apply themselves, which honestly makes little sense to begin with. When I asked them if smart people would think it prudent to apply themselves enough to at least pass, they had no answer. Their combined grade in my class, and in most other classes they took, was not high enough to pass. They would routinely end quarters with less than 10% each. Very seldom did either of them turn in any work whatsoever, homework, projects, even tests and quizzes. They just keep them completely blank and refuse to turn them in. Then, a few weeks later, they would just try to claim they were absent on the day of the test or quiz or ask to do it after school. We kept an electronic record of absences, so their success rate on that ploy was 0 for probably 30. Despite never doing a drop of work, they were both vehemently convinced that all their teachers were out to get them and failing them on purpose because school is easy. It's impossible to fail. They routinely cheated on virtually every assignment they tried to do, but they cheated so poorly it was comical. I frequently caught them with poorly hidden cheat sheets for things like vocab quizzes where the words written were from the wrong chapter. Every now and then, one of their hands would go up in the middle of my lecture. The question was always, "What are we doing?" They quite literally meant, "What event is currently taking place in this room?" They never had the slightest clue if I was lecturing, we were taking a test, or if we were somehow in the midst of a fire drill. Just zero knowledge of the events going on around them. When they started driving, a terrifying thought, they would routinely leave school as they pleased. When questioned about it, their response was typically that they just thought school ended early that day, despite no one else leaving the building. For a solid semester, they both became unnervingly obsessed with Reddit, to the point where they would say r/, insert noun here, as though it was the funniest thing known to man. For example, if I said the word homework, one of them would chime in with r/homework, which absolutely no one found entertaining in the least. Their English class took them to see a stage play adaptation of The Birds, the Hitchcock horror movie. For probably 2 months after seeing that play, they would both constantly mutter, "The birds, the birds, the birds, the birds, the birds, the birds, the birds," you get the idea, under their breath for seemingly every minute of their waking existence. And one day that thankfully stopped. The most soul-rending interaction I had with them was at one of our frequent meetings between me, usually a few other teachers they had, the administration team for the school, principal and 2 vice principals, and both their parents. They were seniors, were short on credits to graduate by an alarming amount, and had the intellectual capacity of young children. I asked the 2 Kevins point blank, "What skill do you believe you have, or at least have the ability to attain, that someone in the future is going to pay you for?" Absolute blank stares from both of them. Minutes went by while all less than 10 of us in the conference room just waited. The parents just sort of looked dejected. Finally, maybe 3 or 4 antagonizing minutes into the dead silence, one of them said, "Video games?" Last I heard, their parents made a large donation to the school, private Catholic school. They took summer classes. To make up their missing credits, both graduated, and both were accepted to a very highly ranked engineering college in a neighboring state. I do not know what has become of them since. They would be seniors in college right now. 3. I used to work as a supervisor in a popular chain coffee shop. The baristas I supervised were most often high school or early college age, and understandably didn't take the job very seriously, or made mistakes because it was their first job. There were times I had to retrain or coach people. There were times I had to go to my manager because someone just wasn't picking it up. There was only one time, however, that I unilaterally made a decision to fire someone without consulting my boss. That was Kevin. Kevin was probably between 19 to 21. He wasn't the brightest crayon in the box, but he was an adult who could presumably handle simple tasks. Right? Wrong. I have no idea what possessed my manager to hire this guy. Kevin must have had a total alter ego in the interview because, while my boss kinda sucked, he would never have hired anyone even a fraction as incompetent as Kevin turned out to be. Kevin couldn't even do the most basic things right. It took him hours to sweep the very small cafe area. He didn't look at customers or talk to them. He didn't respond when they asked him questions. He didn't take orders right. I never even let him near the bar to make drinks. He couldn't follow simple instructions. He didn't even lift his feet when he walked and instead shuffled everywhere very slowly, staring at the ground. He got high on his breaks, which is fine by me as long as you can still do your job. Kevin couldn't. He made everything he did take at least 3 times longer than the absolute maximum amount of time it should take. Customers were irritated that he wouldn't even acknowledge them, wouldn't answer questions, and got their orders wrong 90% of the time. The rest of my team was irritated that they had to pick up his slack, often being slowed down even more than if he just hadn't been there. I put up with it for maybe 2 weeks before I cracked. The final straw came when I asked him to brew coffee one day. He was on front register, since that's where he could do the least damage, so it was his duty to brew the coffee. I told him to start a fresh batch, and I saw him start the machine. Later, I went to get a coffee for a customer, and only water came out. Confused, I checked the brew basket to see what happened. He didn't grind the beans. He put whole coffee beans in the brew basket and started the machine. I was flabbergasted. I tried to let it go and just teach him the right way. Everyone makes mistakes. Maybe he just wasn't a coffee guy and didn't know how to make it. Maybe his trainer glossed over this bit since most people know how to make coffee. I showed him step by step how to take a scoop of beans, put it in the grinder, run the grinder, put a filter in the coffee grounds in the brew basket, and brew the coffee. He said he understood, and I moved on. The timer went off to brew another batch, so I reminded him to do it. A bit later, I went to get a cup of coffee for a customer. Only water came out. He didn't grind the beans again. Despite the step-by-step instructions I gave him, despite seeing the little coffee grounds in the brew basket when he emptied it, he refilled with whole beans again. I couldn't have come up with another excuse for his ineptitude if my life depended on it. I went to the other barista closing with us and asked if she would be okay if I sent him home, and we had a 2-man close. She said it was fine and agreed we'd be faster without him. I sent him home and texted my boss to explain what happened and told him that while I couldn't officially fire him, he was being sent home and that he was not under any circumstances welcome back in my shifts. My boss man formally fired him the next day. Our 2-man close took half as long as a normal close took, and a fraction of what it would have taken if Kevin had stayed. 4. I worked with this guy who was 22, sales and extremely eager to succeed in life. He wore large stud earrings and bracelets with cubic zirconia because they're almost like diamonds. He had a belt which spelled Tommy Hilfiger, and a gold watch larger than any size I've seen. Though enthusiastic, he wasn't very bright, with a touch of casual ignorant racism, and even though his father was Mexican, he was, as he phrased it himself, white passing. I spent 8 months with him. I'm at least 20 years his age, trying to open his mind. Important to add is that I am myself an immigrant from a Scandinavian country. Here are my stories. A lady said she was from the UK, and Kevin managed to forget this since he, a few hours later, tried to figure out where London was located. His first guess was, is it like next to Paris? I'm a bit unsure if he actually knows the difference between UK and England, but I just didn't have enough spoons to ask. The reason he went down this rabbit hole was because, oh my god, did you see how fucking beautiful she was? Are they all that beautiful over there? Hellfreezer's note, yes, we are all shit hot in the UK. He thinks Bolivia is in Europe. Who expects anyone to remember all the countries in the world anyway? On the other hand, he doesn't know Denmark is actually a country either. People with diabetes can't be firefighters because if they get hurt, like on their axe, or a huge rip over their back, then they will develop gangrene and die. Then he spent an hour arguing with me how dangerous diabetes is. Now, to be fair, this is the US and diabetes is definitely not handled very well. I am, although, sure that even people with diabetes can be firefighters in the US. I explained that I wasn't so sure about taking my husband's names because why should I? And Kevin got extremely upset. I will never marry someone who doesn't take my last name because that's how it is. Unless she makes 6 figures, and I do it, of course. So apparently, misogyny is not as important as money. My boss had to have surgery, and Kevin cut her off just to ask about what type of sedation do they use for surgeries? Venom? It's always the man who pays for dates, and if they like 2 gay ladies, the one who is most manly will pay. Note that our boss was actually a lesbian, so we of course poked him about his pompous men always pay. And that's when he explained that it's apparently the more butch lady who pays if they're a lesbian. I feel sorry for blind people because they can't work with anything because they're disabled, and once you're disabled, you're not allowed to work. Kevin had never before encountered the possibility that disabled people do indeed work. After I explained that my dog has allergies and needs to see the vet because he's been shaking his ears, Kevin immediately asks if my dog is allergic to peanuts. Kevin's geography knowledge was not very good, and he guessed if Venezuela is in Europe. When I, an immigrant, talked about the Donner Party, Kevin, born in Southern California, didn't believe me that it happened in California and was convinced that it was somewhere in the Himalayas. We Googled it. He was of course wrong, which I knew, but at this point I tried training him in searching for sources instead of relying on hearsay. When describing the movie Alive taking place in the Andes, South America, Kevin is confused because it wasn't either the Rocky Mountains, Sierra Nevada, or the Himalayas. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the Andes aren't covered in rainforest, even if they are in Latin America. Kevin has several times tried to convince me how ghosts are real by showing me real CCTV footage on YouTube, and he won't accept that they may have been manipulated. I mean, don't take my word for it, but YouTube videos? Kevin claims that the pyramids are alien because no one knows how they are built, and I explained that they aren't alien, and that we actually have a good idea how they were built. I also happen to have a degree in archaeology, but since Kevin doesn't believe like stuff, I decided to show him how they were made using a YouTube video, since we have apparently established that to be a proper scientific media source. He did not believe me. Kevin had hardcore beliefs in God, and to prove me wrong, he Googled to find the first article about a 4 or 5-year-old kid dying in the operation, and who was brought back to life and told everyone he saw Jesus. My co-worker's main argument was 4 or 5-year-olds can't make up that kind of lie, so it has to be truth. This is fact, right here, pointing at the article, so you can't argue against it. Also, hell exists, and when we die, we go to sleep and our soul will leave our body, because that's the only thing that can be true. He does so acknowledge other religions and whatever people believe in is where they will end up, except atheists, because not believing doesn't count for you ending up somewhere, and we will see who's speaking the truth when you die. Kevin thinks Portugal is close to Japan. Kevin doesn't know that Native Americans were once incorrectly named Indians, because Columbus thought he was in India. But he knows that's a bad word and won't use it since it's a fighting word, dude. Note that he's a full born and raised American, and I'm the immigrant. He's not against gay people, but he explained to me how having gays in the army won't be a good idea because they're more feminine. He didn't quite explain how that is, and I honestly didn't want to ask, since he's just too uneducated. When I explained that the army probably already has a ton of gay people without him knowing, he looked a bit puzzled. Yeah, maybe. He believes HIV will immediately be transmitted via a kiss on the forehead. He finally asked me how we celebrate Thanksgiving in my home country, and after the longest 30 minutes, I realized that he assumed all white people had colonized their lands, so it's therefore natural that we also celebrate some sort of Thanksgiving too. I had to explain to him that no one lived there before and we were the first, and no, we did not in fact conquer anyone to settle there because before us, there were kilometers of thick ice covering this area 10,000 years ago. Diabetics cutting toenails have to be careful because if they cut wrong, they can get an infection, sepsis, and die. Kevin was very obsessed with people immediately dying by diabetes. A person entered my work to ask for assistance with their problem and leaves shortly after. My coworker and I discussed why he left so soon, and I suggest that he might not have understood us based on his thick accent, which made it obvious that English wasn't his first language, and this may have acted as a barrier to understanding. Cue a shocked gasp from my coworker. White people can't have accents? While talking to me, a white immigrant with an accent. 5. I met a Kevin with Kevin antics, and didn't know how terrible Kevins could be, since I had grown up with a smart Kevin in elementary school. Cue Pandemica. My boyfriend at the time, now ex, was best friends with Kevin, and they lived quite close, so we were always hanging out together. Kevin was one of those painfully picky eaters. Garlic salt was considered an interesting seasoning to him. Picky gamers, he was utter shit at Smash Brothers Brawl, and refused to play any games he was bad at. And just all-round picky at life humans. The only redeemable thing about him was his BMW motorcycle and girlfriend at the time. That is now a close, homie. Basically, here is a list of things that make Kevin Kevin. Kevin would keep blocking the kitchen area and wouldn't move while I tried to cook. He was over 6 feet and took up space while I was 5'1", and would express how he was making me move around by standing like such. I would have to ask him each time, as well as explain how many feet and where to place his feet to get out of my way. Kitchen space was incredibly small in my ex's place. Kevin would ask why I was not cooking the rice in a rice cooker. He's been over at my ex's place for years and knows my ex doesn't have a rice cooker. Kevin would keep watching how I cook over my shoulders and say, "That's not how my mom does it." Kevin has never cooked, and I came from immigrant parents that made me learn early. Kevin would ask for food after criticizing how I had been cooking the whole 1 or 2 hours, and even after I said I only intended to be cooking for 2 or 3 portions, so my ex would have leftovers for work tomorrow, but he would take half the pot of food. Kevin was half Japanese, mother was incredibly fluent and the stereotypical cute Asian mom, and he would wear shoes in the house, on the carpet, say he eats and loves sushi, but actually could only eat California rolls, and didn't know that rice gets scooped on the plate first before pouring the curry on top. Kevin asked why get plates when I asked him to help serve the Japanese curry, and why I put rice on before the curry. I refused to believe he was any bit Japanese after this. Kevin asked, "How?" when I asked him, "Can you please remove the chicken from the skewers into a bowl?" I literally said, with clean hands, maybe wear disposable gloves and wait for it to not be too hot to the touch. He still hurt himself a bit because I heard him say, "Ouch," while removing the tray of chicken skewers from the oven without oven mitts. Kevin said my pasta was surprisingly good, even though I put weird stuff in it. The weird stuff was basic seasonings and garnishes like oregano, basil, and parsley. Kevin refused to play card games because they were too hard or everyone else is way more experienced than me. We were trying to play Go Fish. Kevin cut off jet skis when I told him the only rules on the water he needs to look out for are other jet skis and boats staying on the right and rocks. After doing so, he said, "Wow, those people need to be careful. We're really close to rocks too." Kevin refused to apologize for a list of things I told him were troubling to me because it was disrespectful to my traditional Asian parents, who need basic manners and thanks because I never did anything wrong and I don't say sorry unless I'm truly sorry, which I'm not. And only called back to say, "I'm saying sorry because your boyfriend called me and I don't want to get cut off from jet skiing." Kevin quit his job because he thought that would make his girlfriend come back to him after she broke it off. In his defense, first she said it was because COVID, and he worked a risky job, seeing so many people every day. But later she talked to him again and said she just didn't see a future with him, but he still thought it was because of the COVID thing, and quit working to prove how COVID-safe he was. His ex-girlfriend tried to tell him to go back to work, and the store was willing to take him back, but he said no. Kevin finished EMT classes and didn't know what HIPAA was when I referenced it in a sentence in story. Kevin wanted to become a firefighter. Kevin didn't study for his National Registry EMT test because studying is boring and still didn't understand why he failed 2 times, then gave up because it was too hard. Kevin wanted to travel when he heard how fun traveling was and thought the only thing holding him back was friends not inviting him. He didn't have a passport and didn't want to do Airbnbs or hostels, and couldn't afford hotels unless his mom paid. Kevin didn't know how to book anything, not even schedule his NREMT exam. Kevin was 26, 27-year-old throughout all of this, and said most college grads were morons. He was a dropout, and his younger sister was in an MBA program. Kevin wanted to get a dog, but said, "The only thing holding me back is my mom, and moving out, I guess." And this was when Kevin was jobless. Kevin told everyone he bought both his R6 and BMW, so people need to become financially independent too. Kevin lived at home rent-free, and his dad had purchased everything so Kevin could make monthly payments to his dad at 0 interest. He knew what time we scheduled lunch, 12 p.m., but still ate before because I got hungry. So he ended up refusing to eat because he was full. Turns out he was scared my mother would cook weird Asian food. It was burgers. Everyone, including Kevin, Kevin's girlfriend, etc., knew it was burgers. We had all discussed for 2 weeks it would be burgers, so Kevin could be included. Kevin was basically a cushy kid that never experienced hard consequences in life, and had no malice or ill will, but he was 100% Kevin. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to A Cacophony of Kevins, Episode 1. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Now, I'd appreciate any help you can give in getting this new series out there, so like it, share it, juggle it, whatever works to help let people know there's a new Hellfreezer series out there. Okay, now, I don't think we have any special shout-outs to do today. No, we don't. Although I did learn that apparently Paramount Plus, which has the new Star Trek show I've been wanting to see, launched a day early in the UK. Still only 3 episodes compared to the 7, soon to be 8 the US has. That's interesting. But anyway, mustn't grumble, we'll move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day, and we're going to keep it on theme. We're going to talk about streaming services. Now, which streaming service do you have that you would get rid of if it wasn't for one show that you actually watch? For me, there were none. I realized basically everything I was watching on Netflix I could get elsewhere, so I cancelled my Netflix, and I'll probably take out a month or 2 here or there when there's occasionally something I want to watch, but it's not worth keeping it long term for me. So, out of the ones you currently have, because let's be honest, many of us have more than one of them. I was at 3, then at 2, now I'm back to 3 for the moment. Would you get rid of if it wasn't for that one really good show? Let me know what you think in a comment below. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.